Hey, everybody. Welcome to the #Anxiety Podcast. I'm Cassie here with the amazing LolaB.
Hi, everybody.
Today, we're talking about seasonal anxiety and how the change in seasons, particularly, at least for me, the fall can impact our anxiety and some things that might work to help during this weird time of year.
Awesome. I'm hoping that you have tips and tricks because I could use some. So I'll tell you my story, but you go first. But first, let's do the disclaimer. We're not clinical professionals. If you need clinical professional help, we're your friends, but we can't help you professionally. So seek help elsewhere and get the support that you need. And we also swear, but I decided that I don't know that we have to keep saying that disclaimer, Cassie, because so far I've sworn in every episode, so people should know by now. And the episode that I did last week with my anxiety of the week, like there were probably 15 times I said the F word. I'm so sorry.
I call it like we just sprinkle it with some flavorful language.
Yeah, I like to call it salty language. So sprinkling salt makes sense to me.
Perfect. Well, I want to hear your update.
Can you see? I mean, for people who are watching on YouTube, I've cried all day long. And I'm already starting to cry. There is an excellent, outstanding chance that I will cry in this episode. It's crazy because for the folks who may not know, Cassie and I don't talk about stuff in advance. We just give a topic and say, hey, what topic do you want to talk about? And then we just shoot from the hip, which I've said before, you can totally tell from me that I'm shooting from the hip and making stuff up as I go along. Cassie's way more prepared and professional, but she puts up with me. So I texted Cassie and said, do you have some thoughts on a topic to talk about? And she texted back and said, how about seasonal anxiety? And I'm driving in my car and had to pull over because I burst into tears. And I just texted her back and said, perfect. It's exactly what I need to talk about. So, but I think I need a minute. So maybe, Cassie, if you don't mind starting and talking about, because you said especially fall is different or difficult for you. So I'd like to hear about that.
The reason this topic came up for me, because I feel like I have been having increased anxiety the last at least couple of days, if not maybe couple of weeks. And when I'm thinking about it, it always happens to me around fall. And I think people have heard of it's called SAD, seasonal affective disorder, which typically kind of makes you think of people get a little bit more depressed during this time of year. I find I get much more anxious this time of year. And maybe I don't think I struggle with, depression, but I definitely get a little bit more gloomy this time of year. And so I know I'd heard this term before and it kind of popped in my head today, autumn anxiety. It's an actual term that was coined by a Welsh therapist, Jean Scully, who has seen this, and I believe that they're a clinical person. And so they've seen it with themselves and in their practice. And so I'm not alone in this, thankfully. And also I don't wish this on people because it's a bummer that it's out of your control. You're just anxious because of the freaking time of year. And it comes every freaking year.
Does it say in the article the reasons why, or is there specific, physiological or whatever things that are going on?
In full disclosure, I glanced, I didn't read fully, but I went through the bullet points and was like, yep, that's me, that's me. So all of the things that were me, I kind of made note of. The things that I didn't resonate with, I ignored a little bit, but a couple of things I mentioned was it gets dark earlier, which of course increases the gloominess of your mood, but also for me in terms of how that impacts my anxiety is I feel like I have less time to do the same amount of work, because once it starts getting dark, I do not have energy. And so I'm trying to cram everything into a shorter amount of time. Overcommitment, like anxiety about all of the things that come this time of year, right? There's sports games and going to different events, and we'll get to holidays probably in another episode, but we know that they're coming. And so there's anxiety about that. The interesting thing I thought, and I I think that I actually have this, which sounds weird, but allergies this time of year can impact
Mm,
anxiety. And what I did read at that part was because essentially with allergies, your body is like attacking it's some
itself.
scientific thing, it's attacking itself, and then it makes you tired, and then it can just make you more anxious naturally.
Hmm.
So I thought that was interesting. I didn't struggle with allergies as much as when I moved to Georgia. I've been here about 3 years, and the fall allergies are the worst here. And so I think that my becoming aware of this autumn anxiety I have has been much more clear living here than any time before.
Yeah, yeah.
And also cold and flu season.
Like physiologically, your body is doing something during cold and flu season,
I
or
think you're
you're
just
just anxious about getting a cold or the flu or COVID.
oh, COVID now. Yeah.
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 Interesting. Well, it's interesting that you talk about the getting dark earlier and how that affects you and affects people with autumn anxiety. My mom passed away. Shoot. I'll try to get through. So sundowners is a real thing for people who have dementia, and my mom had dementia, and she fell almost a year ago, just before Thanksgiving. And when you have dementia, hers was pretty mild initially. It was just lots of short-term memory loss, and she'd repeat the same story over and over, but it wasn't unmanageable by any stretch. And then about a year ago, she fell and broke her hip. And anytime that an older person, especially somebody who has dementia, falls, it exacerbates the dementia significantly, right? And we saw that. I mean, she went from just repeating the same story a couple times to completely almost unable to care for herself, and to know that she needed to go to the bathroom and that she needed to eat, and those kinds of activities of daily living stuff was really hard. And she was crazy and mean, and that's not my mom, right? She'd never been mean like that, and she wasn't very nice to my dad, and she couldn't really recover. Like, she couldn't participate in her recovery. She did okay initially in terms of that. You could say, okay, mom, it's time to do your exercises, and we'd have to show her, and she could do it. And then after Christmas, she fell again and broke her pelvis in several places, and then she died a couple of days later because she really couldn't participate in her recovery. So going back to right after she broke her hip, she as the evening would come, it got significantly worse. Like, she was just hell on wheels and awful. And my poor dad, bless his heart, was trying to manage her, and he has some of his own health issues, breathing issues, and so he's huffing and puffing trying to get around to try and help her. It was just nuts, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. And we have to become educated quickly, and thank God for Google. Again, Dr. Google saved my life, and I found out about sundowners, and that's a real thing, and that it affects folks, and especially elderly folks, with dementia, that as soon as there's no natural light, man, there's something in their brain shifts, and they're just not able to make that connection and not able to make those changes. And they really become, at least in my mom's case, somebody completely different and totally unmanageable. So we were frantically trying to come up with ways to counteract that, right? So putting all the lights on in the house, and there were things that were specific that you could do. So watching TV is not a good idea. Surprise, I didn't realize that. But for those folks, it's not a good idea. It's better to be quiet, to have a routine that you do each night, and to find things that can be distracting, but not necessarily stimulating. It takes a village. So I've mentioned before, I have a lot of siblings. There's 5 of us, which is great. So we would FaceTime with my mom in the evenings to try and give my dad a small break and talk about whatever, and keep things, just kind of keep her engaged and distracted in some ways. And that was helpful. But it was, the more I read about it, the more I'm like, yeah, that kind of stuff works for anxiety as well, and my mom certainly had anxiety. I have anxiety. I could relate to what she was anxious about, although in those times she was over the top. there was very little you could do to kind of bring her back. But that whole seasonal piece really is a thing, and it really does affect you physically, and you don't have to have dementia to be affected by sundowners. We tease all the time that my dog, who's 13, has sundowners because she's so ornery in the evenings, and she probably does, so I try to take those lessons in myself a little bit about what can I do. I don't think I have sundowners, but certainly I am more anxious, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But I'm trying to remember the things that brought my mom some peace and comfort, that they also could help me and bring me some peace and comfort. So routine, and you and I've talked about that, about having a routine and having things that are similar, and quieting your mind and doing some meditation or whatever. And that's helpful. I think sometimes we just don't see it coming. Like you said, all of a sudden here you are feeling anxious and more anxious than usual. And then we kind of think back and go, oh yeah, well, the days are getting shorter and this is really a thing.
I was self-diagnosing that I had bipolar earlier this week. I was like, I must be bipolar because I was a mess for 3 days, and then I'm fine today. And then I was like, oh, it's because it was gray and overcast and gross. And then
Yeah.
it was sunny and lovely and nice the
Yeah.
next day. So it's just my seasonal anxiety.
It does. It makes a difference.
Yeah. I think like you also said, the sun going down, you don't have to have dementia for that to affect you. The same thing. You don't have to have anxiety for this time of year to make you feel more anxious. I think a lot of people who wouldn't say that they have anxiety would also say that, yeah, this time of year, I do feel a little bit more anxious for whatever reason, whether it's the holidays or that it's dark early or any of those things that we already talked about.
Right. A couple weeks ago, you did an episode on EFT tapping, which was so cool. And I will confess, I have done tapping once, and it was helpful. And I need to get in more of a routine so I'm more comfortable with it. And one of the things that I wanted to learn to tap on is that my startle response has been significantly higher recently, and like where I'm over the littlest things, and it just makes me crazy, makes me angry. And I would like for that to not be the case, and I couldn't really figure out why I was so anxious, because that startle response really, when it's that bad, has really only happened when my ex-husband was arrested and all of that stuff. It's settled down considerably since then, and then it's kind of popped back up, and I couldn't figure it out. Well, I figured it out. I was talking earlier in the episode, it's the anniversary of my mom falling and ultimately passing away. So it finally occurred to me, it's like, this is a season. Seasons don't necessarily have to be spring, winter, summer, fall. It can be a period of your life that's particularly noteworthy. So it certainly can be sad and stressful or whatever, but also can be joyful and wonderful, where you have this joyful, wonderful season. Sometimes for me, the season is really more about what's happening in my life than it is about what's happening on the calendar. This particular season is hard, and it finally occurred to me, it's like, I miss my mom. Now, let me be clear, I don't miss the crazy old woman. That was rough. And she would say the same thing. But I miss my mom and how things were before. And I'm also really anxious about losing my dad. It's weird. It's weird to think about losing someone. My dad's wonderful, and he's been around for a really long time, and he's not going to live forever. Nobody does. But I finally figured out my startle response is because I am really anxious about losing him. And the holidays are kind of a thing in our family where people die over the holidays. It's the dumbest thing ever. It's just kind of always been. We've had that kind of crappy luck, I guess, that sometimes the roughest things in our family have happened over the holidays. So good God, I need to give myself some grace and space about the fact that it's a tough time. So I'd like to stop talking now so I can stop crying. And I would like for you to say something, Cassie.
Well, I first want to say, one, I wish I was in person with you and I could give you the biggest hug ever.
Same.
And I really appreciate that you were so vulnerable to share that. I know it's hard. And I know somebody listening right now also has that. There are times throughout the year, and maybe it's not the fall for them, maybe it's the spring or the summer where they've had a big loss, and it's going to be for a while where that is going to cause you a lot of extra feels, anxiety, sadness, anger, all of the range of things. And we don't ever talk about that. Or I think in our society, oh, it's been a year, you should be fine. That's not how it works. And random things can pop up, but significant events are always a reminder.
Right. Yeah, there's no timeline for grief, that's for sure. And I think sometimes we don't fully understand and appreciate how grief and anxiety are tied. And they really are. I mean, it's this whole, trauma and grief and anxiety can all really be tied together. And there's no timeline for it. Certainly there's not for me. I feel like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. And I also I live my life in a joyful way and look for joy. So I don't stay stuck, and I work hard to not stay stuck in the grief and the anxiety, although it's certainly still there, clearly, and that's okay. It's totally okay. But I'm grateful I have family and friends and people in my life who continue to contribute to the joy in my life, and I don't stay stuck in the grief. So it's still hard, and it's still anxiety producing. I'm still really worried about my dad, and how that's all gonna play out and how that's going to go. And of course, my anxiety, I run through that scenario in my head a lot. And so I'm working to try to quiet that a little bit so that it's not so frequent where I'm stressing and anxious and worried about him. I just want to enjoy my time with him and my days with him. So I don't know that I have any strategies for our listeners. I'm hoping our listeners have some strategies for me, because I can use it. If you have things that you would suggest, if you've been through a similar season, I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, make sure to let us know on social media at #anxietypodcast on Instagram. I don't know that I have any great strategies for you either, and I wish I did. This time of year, a few things that have helped me, getting outside when the sun is out. So making an appointment in the middle of the day with myself to make sure that I actually go outside. And
that's a great suggestion.
Even if it's not sunny, just doing that. I know that that doesn't necessarily help with grief, but
that's okay, because it's all tied together, right? So if I can improve my outlook, then the grief takes a back seat, and that's a good thing.
And again, we are not clinical professionals. We are also not medical doctors. But one thing that I do, and I should have probably already started this, but today I will do it. I'm going to add some extra vitamin D and magnesium into just my vitamin rotation. I find that helps a little bit. I tend to be vitamin D deficient. I have consulted my doctor. So if you were thinking about adding these in, make sure to check with your doctor before, but I do find that helps.
Well, thank you for those suggestions. What else?
I was just going to say, I imagine too, in dealing with grief, that there's the anxiety about when is the grief going to hit. For me, I've had the experience of you're randomly doing something. I was on a Peloton bike one day, and it wasn't grief necessarily, but whatever the instructor said, I'm pedaling away, and all of a sudden I burst into tears, which I'm like, what the hell is happening? I'm comfortable with two emotions, anger and more anger. Crying isn't for me. So I was like riding the Peloton, just bawling. And I thought, how embarrassing would this be if I was out in the world? Like, I don't know.
Oh, like now on a recorded version of the podcast. That's fine. It's fine.
You are benefiting the listeners being vulnerable and having those conversations. I'm just over here riding a bicycle, losing my mind.
Did you figure it out?
No, I have no idea, but the therapist said, something just got bubbled up. Sometimes that's how emotion works, which is why I hate emotions, because that makes no sense. I don't need to be anxious about all of emotions just deciding to come out and play.
Right.
But that is how it happens. And if you are in a season of knowing that you're extra anxious, or there's a lot of other stuff going on, or you're worried about something to come, whether it's the holidays or just the dark days, you never know what's going to pop up, which also leads to more anxiety.
Right. So I think we have to go back to our surf kit and maybe do it more frequently, and find additional things or new and different things to add to the surf kit. The surf kit's served me well so far. So I need to hark back to those things, and also, as I said, add to it. I'd love to hear from our listeners about what they find to be helpful in their surf kit, and if there's something particular that I can add to my repertoire. It's like I'll take it. And again, I'm fine. I don't want people to worry about me. I'm all right. Everything's okay. It's just the emotions are really on the surface right now, and it makes sense. For a while, I'm like, for weeks, I've been like, what is going on? And then finally figuring out, I was anticipating November, and here we are. So I'm grateful that I figured it out. And that's half the battle, is to, at least get to the point where you're like, oh, yeah, that makes total sense. And then for me, it's just not healthy for me to sit in the grief and sad and anxiety and overwhelm and all of those things. It's better for me to work my way out. So getting out my surf kit and my EFT tapping notes.
I also think what I add to my surf kit this time of year is more permission to be lazy. Like, it's okay that I go to bed a little bit earlier and maybe stay in bed a little bit longer because it's cold and it's dark. And that's naturally what my body wants me to do versus, when I was younger, my response would be like, I need to get out more. I need to see more people. I need to commit to every possible networking opportunity or event that my friends are doing or get together. And now I'm very selective about where I'm going to put time and energy, because I think this time of year is just exhausting, more exhausting than any other time. And I know for me, when I get tired, we've talked about this, I get much more anxious. And so I just try to give myself more sleep and lazy days in my surf kit.
I like that. And we're still going to do a podcast on Cassie's awesome sleep hygiene, because I could really use that as well. So, but I love that. I think that's really wise. And I'll add a little more R&R to my surf kit. Thank you. Well, Cassie, I know that we have said that we are not clinical professionals, and I know that you're not a clinical professional, but you're still the best therapist. I know you helped me lots today. Thank you.
Ditto, friend. And everybody listening, please again, let us know your tips for this time of year for dealing with any of this stuff, or just say some kind words and send some love to LolaB. And we will see you or talk to you, chat with you next week.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.